will start on that one. So I will share my screen. Okay, now can everybody see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right. So we will start then. Right, this is the final thing we have to discuss on this subject. So this is lecture 5 generally. So far, this is what we were trying to do. It's about, first thing we did is we introduced the movements of architecture that contributed to sustainability positively and negatively. So you did a good assignment on that one, so that is done. Then we looked at some contemporary works of sustainable architecture by the important architects in this century, and that is completed. Then the fundamental concept of sustainable design we went through, and we are doing some assignment now. Then how to do a sustainable design tools and software, we have covered that part also. So what is left is this small section, that is how nature design things and what can we learn from nature about sustainable design. So that is the only small part that is left. So I will complete that today. Then my part of this is complete. Okay, so this is more about my opinion of how nature design things, what we can learn about it. So far things we discussed are things that are consensus about by the world, but this is something I think I have to tell you. So it's something about my opinion of it. So this is basically, it is about mathematics behind architecture. So the civilized world, after we start constructing buildings in proper manner, the architecture has always been based on very simple kind of geometry. So whatever the architecture works we see after in cities and in civilized societies are based on simple geometric forms like rectangles, triangles, or circles or cylinders. So if you look at Egyptian pyramids, so it is just very simple geometry. So even if you look at Buddhist architecture, what you see is domes and rectangles and triangles. And in Greek and Roman architecture, it has been the same. And even in classical architecture, so that is the scenario. And it is most prominently seen in the modern movement architecture we discussed. So in 19th century and 20th century buildings, it is mainly based on simple rectangular geometry. The question is why we have limited the built environment to this very smooth kind of geometry? Is it something essential, and can't we do in a different manner? So that is the question. So what we can see is there's no fundamental need to restrict the built environment to a very smooth, simple frame of geometry. So spaces and places can take forms that are extraordinary forms. It can form like seashells, mushrooms, caves, and rocks. So if you look at anything created by nature, any living space, so any object or any organism, it is not based on this kind of a simple geometry. So why have we restricted our buildings, the things we create, our tables, our chairs, our buildings, the cities, whatever the things, why are we restricting ourselves into a very simple geometry? So there are many reasons we can say about it. For example, so there are conventions we follow from times of our civilization beginning. We have been doing it in rectangle geometry. So there's a cultural habitual way. So that is one restriction. The other restriction may be we are working with bricks that are rectangular. We are working with the glass that are planes, not curves, and whatever the iron bars or extrusions we are thinking of, we are using to construct buildings are designed to do these kind of particular geometric forms. So that is one restriction. So there are many things we can say. For example, when you are drawing, we use T rulers and set squares, which are meant to draw straight lines, not curves. And even if you draw it in CAD, we have the ortho. So when you ortho on, it is vertical and horizontal lines. You are going in simple geometry. So those are some things we can say. That's why our thinking process has restricted to that kind of a geometry. But I think it goes far deeper than that. The real restriction is in our minds. So this is the kind of cities and living places we have created for us to live. The restriction that created this kind of a living environment for us is the mathematics in our mind, the mathematics upon which we build our imagination. We think in terms of Euclidean mathematics, and our geometry is based on a Cartesian geometry. So it's rectangular Cartesian geometry that works in our mind. So those are the tools we use to form our dreams about the spaces and places, maybe consciously or maybe unconsciously. And those are the tools we use to imagine about the places or activities in our minds. And with them only we analyze and quantify our thinking. We rarely use anything more than Cartesian geometry uh, in thinking about any kind of a form or position or whatever it is. So that is the restriction that created this kind of a particular form of built environment for us today. So very rarely we use polar coordinate systems. We mainly strict ourselves into rectangular geometry. So this architecture is about perfect rectangular forms, triangles and circles. And there's a lot of mathematically, there's a lot of smoothness in this kind of buildings and architecture. There is Euclidean mathematics and Cartesian geometry. So today now, in this verge of environmental crisis we are talking about, we learned about in this course, and the need of maximum sustainability in everything we do, we need to relook at this system of architecture we have been adapting from this entire time period of our human civilization. So this is the fundamental set of axioms that has been there in whatever the styles we talk about. May it be modern movement, may it be classical, neoclassical, may it be organic movement, whatever. And whatever the epochs and traditions, the underlying set of axioms is based on this. So what you see here is a city designed by Le Corbusier. I think we saw this graphic image in previous lectures. The problem with this kind of architecture is they are not adaptive. So when sun rises from one side and it sets up from the other side, these forms are unable to take their form out of that solar movement. So if when there's a particular wind pattern, these geometric forms are unable to twist and turn with the flow of the wind and then take advantage of that in terms of sustainability. So they are not adaptive and they are not sensitive. And most importantly, they are unable to merge with the context. So they cannot take form from the trees that are in the site, the streets, and in response to whatever the bridges or whatever the social activities, they are unable to take form out of it and merge with the existing context, be one with the existing context. So they rather stand out like individuals. They are not part of the context. So therefore, this particular kind of system of axioms that lie behind our entire styles of architecture is not very sustainable. So the question is, how sustainable it is for us to continue designing with this the frame of axioms that are behind our thinking? Or can we do better if we rethink about architecture and city planning in a different platform? Is there a way out of thinking beyond this particular set of axioms? So that is the question we are going to discuss. Now, if you look at anything designed by nature, so what you see in the background is the skin of a crocodile. So if you look at anything like this that is designed by nature, so if you look at, for example, a mountain sitting on a terrain, or if you look at our nose sitting on our face, first thing you can notice is none of these things can be described with a simple geometric form. So they don't have a simple geometric form. You can approximate it, but there's no a simple form. And you can see they are sensibly formed to suit the function they perform. And most importantly, they are merged with the context they emerge. So there's no edge that says this is the edge of the mountain and then mountain begins from here. Beyond that, this is something else. Or there's no boundary that says this is the edge of your nose. You can remove it from that. And then the rest is the face. So they are merged to the context they inherit. There are no defined edges that show the boundary between them and the context. And instead of standing as separate individual elements, whatever the things you see designed by nature, So instead of standing as separate individual elements, they are merged with the context they inherent and they have become one with it. So the question is, how does nature design such things? What are the concepts behind these designs of nature? And most importantly, what are the mathematics behind this complexity of nature? Okay. And specifically, this is the question you have to be concentrating all throughout from this lecture, why nature is different. So that is what we are going to discuss. Why nature is different from what we create, what we think. This person is called Benoit Mandelbrot. He's an engineer, so he wrote a book in 1977, I suppose, called Fractals, Form, Chance, and Dimensions. So in his book, he described that many forms in nature can be described mathematically as fractals. So what is a fractal? So I'll go back. So I'll explain what is a fractal. So what you see here, this is a cauliflower. You can see this cauliflower is a cone. It's a simple cone. And if you look what that cone is made out of, it is made out of an spiral array of another set of cones. If you zoom into one of those cones that made this big cone of the cauliflower. So if you zoom into one of these cones, what you see is that cone itself is another cauliflower. So that cone is made out of what? It is made out of a small versions of the same cauliflower. So if you zoom into one of those cones, you once again see the same thing. So that kind of a thing is called a fractal. So there's self-similarity in all scales. The large scale thing is made out of the smaller versions of the same scale thing. So for example, this is a fractal. You take a triangle. We'll remove these things here. Okay. Okay, so you take a triangle, you divide each edge into equal pieces and you add a new set of triangles. And you take each of these triangles and you do the same thing. You keep on doing that. So what you get is a fractal. Same thing can be done. So you take a triangle, you take the center point of each edge, you join them and you create a new triangle, you remove that. So I left it 3 triangles now. You take those 3 triangles, do it again, and then keep on repeating that. So what you get is a fractal. So that is a fractal. So in fractals, self-similarity of a pattern keeps on going in all scales. So this particular system is the one this Mandelbrot called the fractals. So in this one, can you see fractals in this particular image? This is a branch of a tree. So if you look at it, just have a look and see whether you can identify fractals in this branch of tree, this branch of plant. Okay, so this is the form of the branch, and what does that form is made out of? It is made out of smaller versions of the same thing. And if you look at one of those small branches, what they are made out of? They are made out of, once again, smaller versions of the same thing. So that is fractal. So this fractal geometry can be seen almost everywhere in nature. So if you look at nature, you will see this geometry everywhere. You will see it in trees, leaves, whatever the flowers. If you look at corals, it is there. Even if you look at a range of mountains, you can see the fractal geometry. It is there in rivers, it is in roots of trees. If you look at lightning, it is there in the form of clouds. You can see it in snowflakes. You can see it in even micro scale water crystals. If you look at a crystal of water through a microscope, you will see fractal geometry. So most importantly, I think it is there in the formation of galaxies as well. So these are snowflakes. Can you recognize fractal geometry in them? So just have a look at them for a while by yourself and see whether you can recognize. Yeah, so whatever this form is made out of the repetitive forms of the same thing, like in the branch of the plant I showed so earlier. So it is fractal. So this is the formation of a river. Just see whether you can see the fractals. So suddenly we see fractals are the one and only strategy to understand the complexity of nature. And fractals can describe mathematics behind all of them, almost all of them. So that is the way to understand nature. Now we see that. If you look at the neural networks in a human brain, so that is a fractal arrangement. Our vesicular system is a fractal geometric arrangement. This is a human lung. So the lungs are arranged in terms of fractals. So fractals are there everywhere in our body. So these are some of the trees. Just see fractal geometry, and these are roots of trees. So fractals are there everywhere in trees and the roots. So this is a Google image of Himalaya mountain. So just see, this is the formation of ice in the mountain. So just look at this pattern of ice formation. So it is almost fractal. So what we can see is fractal geometry can explain the formation of galaxies. So how gravity makes clusters of stars, and then how that clusters form galaxies. So if you study a galaxy, you will see it is 100% fractal geometry. So from the solar systems to cluster of stars to galaxies, and from galaxies to the entire observable universe, it is an orchestration of fractal geometry. And fractal geometry can be seen in the microscopic nanometer scales as well. So this is formation of water crystals. So when you cool down water. This is what happens in between. It's turning from water to the solid form. So just notice fractals in water crystals here. So it is there all throughout the universe in all scales. It is there in nanoscale to the scale of the galaxies to the entire universe. This is lightning. So can you see fractal geometry in lightning? Then this image shows the high voltage breakdown of, I think this is an acrylic plate. So what they have done is there is a negative charge right round and there's a positive anode here. So it sparks through the crystal, and this is the pattern that sparks goes through. So it is crystal. So suddenly we see there is order in this chaos we see in nature. So nature, when you usually when you look, what you see is it's very chaotic. It is very complex. But there's order in this complexity we see in nature. Order in chaos we see, and there is geometry in waterfalls, flowers, and clouds. You see. So what you see here is a cloud. Just see whether you can recognize any fractal geometry in this cloud. I'll give you about 15 seconds to look at it and then recognize how this cloud is formed in terms of fractal geometry. Okay, whatever this curve form, if you look at what that curve is made out of, it is made out of smaller versions of the same curve. So if you go out and look at the sky, you will see all the clouds are made out of this fractal geometry. So if you have seen fractals in these images of nature, I have seen from now onwards, when you go out and when you look at nature, the way you look at nature will be different. So that is one of the important things you should gather from this lecture. So after the sun, so when you go out and look at nature, look at it in a different angle. So you will see mathematics in nature from that moment onwards. So that is an important thing. Okay, so I will explain another aspect of fractal geometry. I will take this little bit forward than that. I think all of you are familiar with complex numbers. Are you? So we have done it in your A levels. So I don't know beyond that whether you have touched it, but you know what a complex number is. It all begins with square root of -1 for those who don't know what it is. So this square root of -1 has no meaning. There's it's something just imaginary. There's no number as such, the square root of -1. So mathematicians name this as I because it's an imaginary thing. It doesn't exist in this world. So any number that can be described in this form, a plus bi, I is the square root of -1. So this number has a real part. This a has a real part. It can be a number 5, 6, 2.5, whatever. And b is also a real number. It can be 1, 2, 3, whatever. But when you multiply it by I, this part has no meaning. It doesn't exist in this world. So any number that is in the form of this a plus bi, or let's say for example 2 plus 3i, because it has a real part and an imaginary part, this kind of a number is called a complex number. So those who don't know what it is, so this is a simple explanation of it, and it's a recap for you. The important thing is these complex numbers can be represented graphically in a plane called complex plane. So I will explain what a complex plane is. It's a simple thing. There is a horizontal axis. So this one we will call the real axis. So whatever the real part of this number can be on this line. And there's a vertical axis, that is the imaginary axis. So whatever the imaginary part we can represent in this axis. So for example, 2 plus 3i or a plus bi can be represented in this coordinate system like this. So a is the real part. So distance along the real axis we mark like that. And b is the imaginary part. So b distance from the imaginary axis is here. So a plus bi point can be represented like this in this particular coordinate system. So that is simple enough. I think everybody can understand it. So this plane, the imaginary and real two axes, this particular plane is called the complex plane. Okay. So this person's name is Gesto Julia. So in 1800s, 1900s, what he did was he took this complex plane and he took one number, a complex number on the complex plane. And he took an equation. Let's say this is the equation. So its equation is fx equals x squared minus some constant, let's say 0.75. So what he did was he took this equation and he gave a complex number to the value of x. So let's for our easiness, let's give only a real number. Let's say we put number 1 here. So if you put number 1 to this equation, square of 1 is 1. So when you minus 0.75, it's 0.25. So this is the result, sorry. So this is the result we get when you put number 1 to this equation, okay? I think it's something very simple. But after that, what he did was he took this result he got and you apply it once again back to this equation as x. So you feed a complex number here, you get a result for fx, you feed it back as x in the same equation and see what happens. Okay, so we get 0.25. When you apply 0.25 as x, so square of 0.25 minus 0.75 becomes some minus number here. You get a result, you apply that result once again back. You don't stop. You keep on doing it for a very long period. So that is called iteration of an equation. So you iterate that equation. So what you can see is if you do it for a very long time, this result slowly approaches minus 0.5. So if you do it for infinite times, you will get minus 0.5. So it is not going anywhere else. So what he did was he took this complex number. For us it's a real number, so it is number 1. So if it is reaching a finite number like this, he took that number, he colored it in black. Then let's say we will take another number. So he took, let's say we took number 2. So we apply number 2 to this particular equation here. So if you put 2 here, square of 2 is 4. 4 minus 0.75 is 3.25. So if you apply 3.25 once again to this equation as x, 3 square of 3.25 minus 0.75 becomes some 9 point number. So when you apply that, it becomes 95. So when you applied square of 95 minus 20, it becomes some 9,000. So this number 2 is rushing to infinity very easily. So if a number is not reaching a finite value and if it rushes into infinity, what he did was he didn't color it. He left it as it is. So likewise, he took an equation and keep on coloring the equation like this on this complex plane. He died somewhere around 1970s. So the number of calculation that is required to see any form of a graph on this complex plane is very, very large. So actually, during his lifetime, he was unable to see the form of these equations on complex plane. But he sketched blindly on the forms that he thought that they would have generated. But afterwards, with the computers, we were able to generate these curves he's trying to draw. So for this equation, this is the curve. So today with computers, you can, in a fraction of a second, you can generate Julia sets, for example. This is the same equation we looked at earlier, but the value of C is this number. So you get this kind of a graph. So this is, I'm using a very simple equation, x squared plus C, the same equation. For C, when you give a complex number, this complex number, 0.4 plus 0.6i, this is the form you see. So this is another thing you see for a different number of C here. This is a cubic equation when you take, instead of x squared, when you take z, let's say x cubed. So this is the graph you see. Okay, so these colors, you might imagine, how does these colors come? The way these colors come is you take the rate, the how fast something reaches the infinity, or how fast a number reaches a finite figure. So if it is reaching a finite number very fast, you give one color. So likewise, you can color, give a color map to these renderings. And then Benoit Mandelbrot, we discussed earlier, he came out with this fantastic mathematical fractal form, so which is now is taken as the emblem of fractal geometry. And this is his equation. So it's the same simple equation, z equals z squared plus c. It's the same one we discussed earlier, but here the difference is you don't iterate, you don't give a constant number to c and iterate z. What you do is you always give 0 to z and start from 0. For c, you give different numbers. So you can give any complex number to C, but Z always start from 0, and then you see what happens to this equation. So it's very simple. It's Z equals Z squared plus C. So this is the same graph rendered in colors as I explained earlier. So if a number goes to infinity very fast, you color it in black. So if the rate is slow, you give it different colors. So you get this kind of image there. It's a colorful image. So color theme you can assign as you want. So this one becomes a little bit interesting if you zoom into one of the edges. So whatever the edge you can select whatever the edge you want, and you can zoom into this boundary. So there are apps on Mandelbrot set you can download to your phone or your tab or your computer, and then you can do these calculations, zoom into this by yourself and then see. So if you look at to one of these edges here, you will begin to see something like this. Okay, so if you zoom into one of these edges here, you will begin to see something like this, and you can keep on zooming. So let's say we zoom into this corner here, and then you see this. So into this Mandelbrot set, you can keep on zooming infinitely. There's no end, and it keeps on giving you very interesting set of forms. By the way, can you recognize fractals in these geometric forms? Just see whether you can recognize. So if you look at this particular form here, let's say this particular form, if you look at what that form is built out of, it is built out of repetition of the same form. And if you look at one of those forms, it is the same thing. So it is predominantly, it's very fractal. Okay, so what you see here in the background is not a graphic image or rendering. It is a mathematical equation. It's a very simple mathematical equation. So once again, here also, can you recognize fractals? Just see whether you can see it. So there's a particular spiral form here. So if you look at what that form is built out of, it is built out of same kind of spiral forms, isn't it? And if you look at one of those, what it is made out of, it is the same thing. So this is mainly fractal. But it looks like a very interesting painting kind of a thing, but it is a simple mathematical equation. So suddenly we recognize, so we think art is something different, mathematics is something totally different. So there are two extremes, but we now begin to see arts are very close to mathematics. So these are fractal renderings by computers. So this beauty of fractals can't be identified without computers. So we can't generate it manually or in any other way. So they came into life with these computers and the fast rendering engines. They came out. So arts, mathematics, and nature. So once we thought these are totally not related things, they cannot be taken together. But now suddenly we begin to see they are almost the same thing. They are one thing. So these are some of the fractal equations, the forms. So you can, if you are interested, you can download thousands of them in the internet, and there are softwares that generate them for you very easily. So do a study by yourself if you are interested in these patterns. So fractals are not just 2D graphs. You can generate 3D fractal forms. So that is why I'm talking about it. So it is uh, it, it is related to the forms, 3D forms and spaces we are talking about. So these are some of the equations that are generated through computers, and some of them are actually 3D printed. So this one is a 3D print of a fractal equation. Even the Mandelbrot cell can be converted into 3D form. So that 3D form, there are two ways of doing it. There are two set of equations. One is called the Mandelbrot. So this is the set of equations. In fact, you can feed these equations into Blender. So with Blender, you can create these Mandelbrot sets, both 2D and 3D. So one is Mandelbrot. There's another one called Mandelbox. So that box is, I think, simpler than this. So there are other systems called Julia bulb is there, then Julius bulb is there. So in the internet you can find many equation sets for complex fractal geometric systems, or you can create your own system. So I'm not going to teach how to do it, but if you are interested, you can do it directly in Blender. The important thing is if you zoom into one of these fractal forms we generate and see closely, you begin to see 3D spaces and places inside them. So if you look at these four images, they are interesting places and they are fractal equations. So there are videos on fractal zooming and many things about this 3D fractal geometry on the internet. I'm not going to show that, but they are very, very interesting. You can have a look at in your leisure time. Okay, so these two are actually not any live forms. They are not corals. They are 3D prints of some fractal equations, but they have a very much similarity to what we see in nature, particularly in corals and living forms. So they seems like very much related. So when we look at it, so how this similarity comes, we don't know, but what we can see is there's a great synergy between the nature and these fractal equations we see. One way it could be is if you look at quantum mechanics. If, I think some of you have basically touched on it. So it works on this Paul Dirac system of calculation. It works on complex numbers. So for example, this is the Schrodinger equation that explains distribution of electrons when you shoot an beam of electrons to electron gun. So this is the probability distribution of that, and this particular wave function is a complex number. It's a complex function. So our system of complex plane, the mathematical basis of quantum mechanics is almost the same. So our system of 3D complex geometry generates forms like this. So this is simply by iteration of equations, you can reach into this kind of forms. We don't know how nature creates things, but what we can see is at its root of information system of genetics and these genal codes and all, the underlying principle is almost the same kind of mathematics. So there can be a similarity. It may be the same thing. We don't know what it is. But what we see is there's a huge similarity. So these are some of the fractal equations rendered in computers. They actually close up zooms into places. So there are two key insights we can reach at looking at this fractal geometry. The first one is this fractal geometry shows the way to understand the complexity of nature. So that is the most important thing. So with fractal geometry, we can look out into nature and we can understand the geometry behind that. And another important thing is this fractal geometry shows the way to design things like nature has done. So when we understand how nature has done it, when you understand the mathematics behind that, it is possible for us to design like the nature has done. So this is the message I try to convey. Classical mathematics we use, it is built smooth. So clouds and all are outside this set of mathematics. But fractal geometry shows the way to understand the complexity of nature. So this is the summary of what we discussed. And fractal geometry shows the way to do mathematics on nature. And most importantly, with that we know how to do like nature has done. Okay, now if we get back to this question, why nature is different? Why nature is different from what we create? Why it is different from the forms of our cities, forms of our buildings, forms of our equipment, furniture are so much different to things designed by nature, the mountains and the trees and the flowers, why they are so much different. So can you answer why nature is different now? Yeah, it is simple. It is because nature works in a different platform of mathematics. So you understand what that platform of mathematics is now. So that is why it is different. So this is the moral of the story. Now, in the 21st century onwards, we are into a verge of a new style of architecture. So we talked about modern movement, which was the biggest movement of architecture that prevailed there for about 50 years now. But right now, we can see hardly any modern movement architects. There is another very big movement of architecture is coming, and that system is called parametricism. So this is the new movement of architecture that is coming up in the world. So it is a different style. So it is the biggest style after modern movement, and it is on moving now. It is in its infant stage, but it is going very fast. So parametricism is all about using algorithms, programs, and computers to manipulate equations for design purposes. So I will explain it with an example in the next slide and onwards. So for example, let's say this is a cube. So this can be parametricized. So this cube, you can see it has a height. So this height can be changed if you parametricize it and if you make it a function. So as you change the number, this will go up and down. So you can, it has a length, it has a width. So those things you can parametricize and change. So as you give different numbers to this height, width and length, it will change into different forms. So this cube not only has height, length and width, there are other parameters you can think about it. For example, it has a twist. This has a zero twist. It is not twisted. So if you give a twist to this one, it will twist in particular direction. And you can assign another parameter called indentation. This surface doesn't have any indentation, so it is flat. So if you change that indentation, it will take into another form. So this particular cube, you can convert into something like that. Because it is parametricized, you can change the parameters as you want, and then you can manipulate parameters and play with it until you get the form you want. So that is parametricism. So let me see whether I can open Blender and show you an example. Yeah. So for example, this is a building I have designed for particular project. Let me see whether I can show that project to you. Then you will get a proper feel of it. Okay. So this is that particular building I'm going to show you that we designed. So this is Blender file of that particular one. So if you look at, I will zoom into this model. So this is the set of equations that has generated that particular form. I think we discussed a little bit about this node systems and we did only very fundamental things, but each node is, if you zoom into each one of these nodes, you can see it is just a mathematical equation, nothing else. So result of one equation is connected to another equation. So this is a sine wave, and then we have multiplied it by particular number, and we have made it vectification. So we have x, y, z vectors, and then we assign that vectors here into a matrix. So that kind of a thing. So each of this node is a mathematical equation. For example, this is the twist of this building. So you can say, as I adjust this number, the twist is changing. I can twist it the way I want. So it is, this twist is parametricized. Likewise, I can change the number of floors, the height. I can adjust the thickness of these things. So everything is parametricized. So these are some of the bakes. After I'm satisfied with this particular form, I can bake it, and then this is a simple polygonal model we were thinking about. So when you just click the bake button, it bakes. So let me bake this. Yeah. Okay. This is the So this is the form we created. So we can keep on manipulating whatever the parameters that generate this particular form, and then until you reach the form you want. So you can play with thousands of forms as you wish. So that is all about parametricism. And if you look at Blender, another important thing is to these parameters. If you want to type in any equation, you can type, for example, this one. Let's say I want to say this is 1 minus 0.2 divided by 8. I can just type the equation, and when you can enter, it automatically calculates. So you can feed in complex numbers also here, and you can do complex calculations if you want. Okay, so that is called parametricism. The important thing is in parametric design, we can manipulate parameters as we wish, and you can take the form of the building very flexible. So with this parametricism, we are now equipped with tools and software to design buildings, spaces, and urban places and cities with equations and mathematics. So if you bring mathematics of nature into these parametric design systems, particularly designing with complex numbers, it is possible to alter the very basic foundations of architecture that generate our living environment. So this built environment with rigid, non-adaptive and non-responsive elements. We talked about this rigid, non-adaptive, non-responsive urban fabric can be changed simply by changing the this rooted frame of mathematics that generate it. So that is the message. So the important thing is there is a set of conventions in our thinking that generated this particular form of architecture, this particular form of cities and living spaces. So if you can break through that box of conventions that restrict our imagination, we will have a more sustainable and a better world to live in. So we can generate buildings that respond to the sun path, that respond to the wind, that respond to the context they emerge and take form out of it. So social, economic, whatever the background, it can absorb, and a building that can take form out of those forces. So such a building is a sustainable building, and a city that is made out of in such a manner is a sustainable city. So that is the message I want to convey about the designs of nature, how nature design things, and this is what we have to learn from nature about sustainable design. Okay, so that is all about how nature design things. And this is the end of my formal lecture series. So we have only the assignment things to continue. So I have shown you more than 500 slides in this lecture series, just because learning about architecture is all about seeing things, feeling things, and being with things, and it is not about some theory you learn. So that's why we showed such a large number of slides of projects, buildings and all. So this is the beginning of this lecture series. This is what we discussed. I said this lecture series is all about if you want to contribute to make a sustainable built environment. I asked the question that you have to be in a team that design buildings. So if you are in a team that design buildings, as the sustainable built environment professional, what is your input? How can you contribute to the design? And I said, you will learn menus and manuals. It is not about repeating them, parroting them off. And I asked the question, how to contribute to make a baby. So there's one way is you can give it shoes, it adds some milk and whatever. But the real contribution is in a making a baby is the genes that generate. So it is it defines what the baby itself is. So likewise, even in the design, you have to contribute in making fundamental design decisions. So how to do that when you are in a team that design buildings as a sustainable built environment professional, how to do that, how to influence the team in the making of fundamental design decisions, the form of the building, the orientation of the building and such things. So that is what I want you to teach you. So I don't know how successful it is, but I tried to do that. So this is the slide number 2 of my lecture series. We begin. Slide number 2, I said, this is what I'm going to do. We'll teach you about understand the sustainability problem at its very roots we are trying to answer. So we see why it is so important to understand what is the problem we are going to solve. Otherwise, you will be doing many various things thinking it is the sustainability, but it is not. So that we did. Then I said we will develop a good taste of architecture and its styles. So I think right now you have a good understanding of what it is. So if you look at a building, you can say whether this is a modern movement building, whether this is an organic building. And right now you will be able to say whether it is a parametric design or not also. And the important thing is we wanted you to understand the fundamental concepts of sustainable design. So how to work with wind, work with sunlight, work with the context, work with the urban heat island effect, and so forth in designing sustainable buildings. So I think now you have a good understanding of fundamental concepts of sustainable design. And as a team, we have to do a sustainable design. So in other years, we did it in terms of group works, and also right now, because of this online system, we can't do it. So we are going into individual works. So it is very important you do it and show that you are capable of doing it. So that is what we have to do this week and the next week, and then we'll complete it. So in this process, I said we are not going to make you into architects, but simply teach you how to understand architects and work with them, and how to work in a design team. So that is the main idea of this series of lectures. And just remember, this is the essential center point of all you are learning in this lecture course. So everything must come here and connect into this thing in order to make a sustainable world. And this is the outcome of the first lecture. This is what he said. So this is the 7 billion people living in the world today lined up here. The poorest billion and the richest billion. And what this graph showed is the use of scarce resources by the 7 billion people from poorest billion to richest billion. And we notice that the considerable part of it, so this red part of it, is consumed by the richest 3 billion and not the others. So sustainable architecture is a solution to this global problem, and the global problem it is a problem about the number of people we have to share this particular planet with. So right now we have 11 we have to share it with 11 billion people somehow. Right now we have 7 billion. So how to do that? The way is, as we discussed, we have to reduce here. And if you manage this particular part well, 11 billion people can share this planet and live happily without a problem. So sustainable architecture, a good piece of sustainable architecture is something that contribute to do that. So that is the summary of our lecture series. So this is the footprint of humanity on Earth now, and this is the Earth. So that is the problem. So this ecological footprint or the carbon footprint of humanity, we have to reduce and squeeze it down to make it suit the size of the Earth. So that is the moral of the story. Okay, so with that, my formal lectures are completed. So what we will do is we will take a 15 minutes break, and we will come back at 10 o'clock. 10:05. So we will come back at 10:05, and then we will look at the assignment you have done. And then we will have a formal discussion. So for each one, we will comment. So others also can comment on your work, and then you can improve your thing based on that. Okay. So we will get back at 10:05.
Okay.